Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of Redux. Great to see you all here bright and early after the Ceilidh, which I hope everyone enjoyed. Pause for enthusiastic whooping. A couple of housekeeping things first. We do have a designated quiet room in case anyone needs just some quiet time at any point during the day. That's the Duddingston room, so that's back through to where the coffee breaks are held and off to the right. So that's not for meetings or networking. The idea is that's just somewhere to be completely silent. We have Gaelic with Ailey during the breaks. That's at the whiteboard next to the covers display. And that's it from us. So without further ado, I will introduce our next speaker. Charles Watkinson is Director of University of Michigan Press, last year's President of AU Presses, and member of the board of the OAPEN Foundation and Directory of Open Access Books. And to continue yesterday's pet theme, he's also the owner of 2 cats, and they are large. Just the details I've been given about those cats. So he'll be talking about how the University Press community can shape the open access movement. So over to Charles.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you to everybody for a wonderful conference. It's really so fantastic to have this chance to talk about our weird and wonderful field of publishing. It's very nice also to see people made it through the Ceilidh. So today I'm going to talk very loudly and have very dense slides. You think I'm kidding, but that actually is what's going to happen. So, okay, so University of Michigan Press is so I just want to situate myself and explain what I'm going to talk about a little bit and my perspective. So University of Michigan Press, as you can see from this slide, so we are a book publisher. We're in the central US, so in the Midwest, and we're a mid-sized university press. We produce about 80 monographs a year. As you can see from the books the squirrel is sitting on, we publish in performing arts, political science, Asian, African studies, and classics and medieval studies. So we have a strong bias towards humanities and qualitative social sciences. 75% of our new books, new scholarly books this year are open access. That's our front list. And you can see them flying out into the world. And I think you could say we're nuts about OA. That's a squirrel joke. We also operate our own publishing platform, Fulcrum, which is used by other small university presses and other publishers. The platform is really oriented towards multimodal books. And you can see that there's a smaller squirrel listening to multimodal books on its headphones. And we're a proud member of AU Presses. We have a strong equity commitment. I found yesterday's talks very inspiring and thought-provoking, and you can see the scales of justice with more nuts on them up at the top. So when the conference was being sort of trailed online, this particular panel was picked up by Kent Anderson, who is somebody who is not a big fan of open access. And here I am, another sign of OA failure. But actually, when I sort of put out the title, Reclaiming Open Access for University Presses, it's not about OA failure. It's about how open access is, in my view, absolutely core to achieving our mission as university presses. It's the biggest opportunity to achieve mission we've had in 100 years. And we need to reclaim open access by living our shared university press values. We are the people who can actually make open access become the thing that we all, I think, want it to be and that it's failed to be so far. And I'm also going to suggest that the financial tools are well within our grasp. So, first, claim 1, advancing open access is core to our mission as university presses. So when one thinks about the mission of university presses, and you're a US press director, you look at these sort of the backdrop of the creation of the Association of American University Presses. And this man, George Parmley Day, was a really formative figure. He was the treasurer of Yale University and the first director of its university press, the president. And his quote here really points to the fact that even at the start, a financial official of a university press, like of a university, a top financial official, never expected a publisher of monographs to make money. But what he did believe in was this extension mission. The devotion of the university whose name the press bears, getting the name of the university out there, and also a very strong focus on achieving impact beyond the academy. So you can see at the end, he says, may obtain still wider distribution of their volumes, not just among the graduates of any given institution, but very generally among our people. This really fits with the most famous quote that one hears a lot around the origin of American university presses. It is one of the noblest duties of a university to advance knowledge and to diffuse it not merely among those who can attend the daily lectures, but far and wide. So that's Gilman, the founder of Johns Hopkins University Press. So carry that forward to today, and the mission is unchanged amongst the newest members of the Association of University Presses, and this is Lever Press, which is the newest member. The mission is unchanged. The big white man has been replaced by a more collaborative group. This is actually an interesting publisher, Lever Press, because it's actually a consortial press run by 50 liberal arts colleges. But you can see there the focus on engaging globally in the exchange of new scholarship. So our mission continues. We're here in Edinburgh, but just up the road is Aberdeen, which is one of the newest university presses. And I'm making the rather controversial claim here that Aberdeen University Press was the first OA university press, and even maybe the first university press, and apologies to Cambridge with its 1534 Johnny-come-lately date. Because William Elphinstone, the founder of Aberdeen University in 1495, founded it with this wonderful mission, open to all and dedicated to the pursuit of truth in the service of others. And Bishop Elphinstone was also the publisher of the first printed book in Scotland, the Aberdeen Breviary, that has been taken colonially by Edinburgh University, but it belongs in Aberdeen, so return it. About 1510, Scotland's first printed book, a person convinced that open access was the future, Bishop Elphinstone, the new founder of the University Press movement. Sorry. So, yesterday we talked quite a bit about the issue of telling the story of open access. And I wanted to just share a few data stories because I think Ben Dem was really so on the money yesterday when he talked about the fact that, you know, we don't know much about what's behind the numbers that we see, and we really want to get to the human stories, and this is also how we're going to convince our institutions. So quantitative data is all very well, and at University of Michigan Press, we've really tried to work hard on creating a good sense, a good source, a robust story about open access. And we've had to use a variety of different tools to do so. So on this slide, you can see on the left-hand side the IRIS system from JISC, and that's normalizing data from our own Fulcrum platform. And it also is putting it in comparison to 230 other institutional repository platforms, and also the OAPEN data. So it's doing a very, very good job at JISC of normalizing what is otherwise very out in the wilds sort of data to a Counter 5 standard. So that's IRIS. Over on the right-hand side is LibLink's Touchstone. So this is one of the new commercial products which provides an overlay of IP addresses and allows you to look at open access usage by institution and potentially in the future by various other sort of filters, geographical filters, etc. And then in the middle is this effort to bring everything together. This is the open access book usage dashboard now run by OAPEN with Curtin University. And the crucial thing about this is it's bringing usage from lots of different platforms into a common environment and then offering visualizations. So that is publicly on our site, and we found it extremely useful. The challenge that anybody trying to do this quantitative data work immediately finds is that you think you can get enough platforms to tell the story of open access, like data from enough platforms, and then suddenly you realize that you're missing so many platforms. So you're missing the Internet Archive, you're missing this library, that source. And that's where the OA Book Usage Data Trust comes in, which is an initiative that several people in this room are involved in to try and build a space, an international data space, to bring the usage data together, to level the playing field for all of us. Qualitative data, we also are trying to pull together a number of different sources. So on the left is the familiar but expensive Altmetric Explorer. We can afford that because our institution buys into it. So that's looking at online mentions, including policy mentions and not just social media, but really quite rich mentions from other sources. And then on the right-hand side is the Open Syllabus Analytics project, which is so useful in telling the story of pickup in syllabi, but only publicly available syllabi or ones contributed to the tool. But I really want to talk particularly today about the data that we pull from the Fulcrum free ebook survey. So back in 2017, we had a grant and worked with open book publishers in Cambridge to create a kind of a little pop-up survey. So when you go to our platform and you start to read an open access book, this little survey pops up, goes away very, very quickly. It's completely optional. And it says, we're just interested in learning more about open access. Would you mind telling us a bit about how you found, acquired, and used our book? And we've got 9,000 responses now of real people out there using open access books, and that's what I want to share some of now. I'm also going to share a few audio clips from a project we've done to actually follow up with people who responded to that survey who said they were willing to talk more. So we had some graduate students go out and actually phone them and see if they did want to talk more, and some of them did. So I'm going to talk about the various people who are benefiting from open access. I think, some critics of open access have suggested that, for monographs, have suggested that specialist knowledge is designed for specialists and narrow casting is sufficient. And you'll be familiar with the sort of people at Oxford and Cambridge, for example, who have talked about for those who wish to have access, there is an admission cost. They must invest in the education prerequisite to enable them to understand the language used. Okay, so let's make that presumption that monographs are written by scholars for scholars. The thing is, the scholars are no longer in wealthy institutions on tenure. They are not in these spaces where libraries can afford to provide access to them. And these numbers are drawn from the US, but I think the same picture is really playing out in the UK. So you can see on this graph the percentage of total number of faculty by appointment type, fall 1987 through fall 2021, from the Association of American University Professors. So what you can see there is over 2/3 of faculty members in US colleges and universities held contingent appointments in fall 21. That's up from 47% in fall 1987. So the thing about this is so many respondents to our questionnaire are in this situation. They are contingent faculty. They have very, very limited, very confusing, very patchy access to electronic information, e-books. They also work in an environment where there are many gaps. So the gap between graduating and getting your first job with Access. That's a crucial moment when you're working to tidy up your dissertation for publication, for example. This is all in the US, UK, but think about the extra burden in a country like Pakistan. I'm an assistant professor of English at a public sector university in Pakistan, pursuing my PhD in English literature. I'm really impressed with this free source, since in Pakistan we have either no books of this nature or very expensive books. I think the intersectionality of real people really emerges, and I want to just play a little bit about from a disabled independent scholar, Tesla, at UC Davis.
I do have a community library card for the UC Davis Library, but I don't get electronic access to those books from home. I have to physically go into the library to do that. So it's very, very convenient when books are open access. That means I can just be in my pajamas, curled up on the couch, reading it on a Kindle instead of making the actual trek into the physical space.
So Tesla is mobility impaired, she's an independent scholar, she's working on her work, and she has a community pass to the library. So multiple layers of impediment are laid upon her for accessing an ebook. So open access is essential to her work. I think it's very important to really emphasize how much open access extends our institutions' global reach. And that's important because our institutions care about global. You know, UCL, the UK's global university. I mean, every institution has some ambition around global. And of course, one of the reasons is that there's a lot of money, there's a lot of impact, a lot of quantifiable financial benefit in global impact. This pie chart is showing the distribution by country. This is from LibLinks. So distribution, no, sorry, this is actually from JISC, this is from IRIS. This is the distribution by country of the users of the University of Michigan Press ebook collection, so particularly our open access books. And you can see here that, yes, 37% are in the US, but look at all the range of other countries accounting for that other 63%. And that's a complete flip in distribution from when we had restricted access books. So this is what global reach feels like. So these are real people responding. And I think what's really interesting to me here is just the way in which information and knowledge promote equality, equity. It promotes understanding in this more divided world that we're facing. And I'm interested in these quotes at the end. As a researcher from Egypt, it's sometimes very hard to get access to many books and academic papers. I believe that getting access to those books could be one of the tools used to fight authoritarianism and spread democracy in the Middle East. Here's a Russian. Now in Russia, there are few alternative sources of information. Most information channels broadcast the state agenda in one way or another. Therefore, any alternative opinion, especially one based on facts, is very valuable. I want to play, this is Nand Kumar. He's a professor in Goa.
When I retired, my annual salary was $10,000 per year. So $45 was a big, that it was prohibitive. If that book was to be offered for $1, I would have purchased it. So basically it is equity and entitlement of people and their purchasing power also which should define the open access system. It is basically a very cruel economic model. Actually,
so it was a little bit hard to hear him on that line, but he was saying this is a crisis, this is a human crisis, that he and his colleagues cannot get access to quality information without open access. Policymakers. So I think when one says, oh, open access impacts policymakers, one may have a fairly loose understanding of who one's actually talking about. The thing about policymakers is it's local policy. It's individuals on the ground in NGOs, advocates, people who passionately believe in something. It's not necessarily Whitehall or the White House. Those are the sources that Outmetric will track, but these are real people on the ground. And also, it's the people themselves, but it's also the channels to the people. So journalists. I'm a freelance journalist with geek leanings. This will not only feed my brain, but it will inform my work, increase the quality of the questions I ask, and potentially direct me to people I can interview. I couldn't afford to buy it, so open access is really appreciated. I had a couple of interesting conversations yesterday about incarcerated people and prisons, and I want to play you a little clip from a prison educator, Jennifer.
Just how much that we appreciate it in the prisons, because it's materials we wouldn't be able to get otherwise. We get a lot of donations from high schools, but we don't get college textbooks donated anywhere. So it's a big help for us to provide, materials they enjoy.
The interesting thing about her environment is that there's no internet connection from the prison. But what she does is she can download and print out books because she's allowed to by the CC licensing. So she downloads, prints them out, and then hands them out to prisoners. And she says that bound textbooks, when they're donated, it's very difficult because they'll be taken to a cell, and then they'll be pepper sprayed or something like that. There'll be a kerfuffle and they'll be damaged. So she loves the fact she can just go, download it, circulate it. In fact, this was in the connection of a book we published called Music on the Move, and she says that music is one of the most desirable sources for prisoners because many of them are interested in becoming singers or rappers or whoever, so they really, really love music books. I think this is a big argument that is often talked about, that OA helps student affordability legally. It prevents people having to be forced to pirate. And people don't want to pirate. That's what comes out of these comments. They really don't, but we're not giving them any option not to. So this is from the Open Syllabus Project. This is just a picture of one of the books that we made open access, Mongrel Nation, actually through Knowledge Unlatched. And you can see now with the Open Syllabus Project, you can actually filter by open access books. So it's a really interesting source of analytics. But it really comes down to the more nuanced argument one can make once one digs into the data. So this is Music on the Move that I just mentioned. And the data here comes from LibLink's Touchstone. And so what LibLink's Touchstone is doing is it's trying to identify institutional usage. And you can see that what's really interesting here is the percentage of unaffiliated users, unaffiliated with institutions. Now, I should say that may be because they're on an institutional campus, but they're not needing to log in. So, but that is this friction-free experience. There's no need to wrestle with the authentication mechanism. And what I wanted to point out is just the sort of identities of the institutions that are picked up as users. Community college, state college, technical college, community college, city college. These are the institutions where liberal arts is being kept alive. In fact, as the quote at the bottom shows, the liberal arts scene at these community colleges, these smaller institutions, is much, much more vibrant in many ways than many of the regional doctoral universities. And we're helping with open access.
Absolutely. I mean, we have those administration pressures to move to OA, but this was something that was even, relevant to me before that outside influence. And to me, it's important to make education accessible, especially for students where, a $30 textbook might be a barrier. So it was very, very important to me to find some way to either find an open access textbook like this or just use primary resources that, I would find in my own time.
So all of these recordings, when you see the slides, you'll be able to click and you'll have captions as well. I know they're a little bit difficult to hear. I think that's a segue to the fact that open access supports all of us with disabilities. One of the really interesting things we found with interviews is that accessibility and accessibility are on a continuum. So when people talk to us about open access, they also are talking often about accessibility for print disabled readers. And I would count myself as a print disabled reader because we're all on the spectrum. I now use Kindle almost exclusively or other e-readers because my eyesight is aging eyesight. So that's what I really mean about OA supports all of us with disabilities. And you can see with these quotes that there really is this, this spectrum where accessibility and accessibility are very relevant. Here's Sarah.
Are the books actually accessible to people who may have a vision disability or, you know, whatever format it is? Like, are the equations in the books accessible so they can be read by a screen reader and that kind of thing? Because it is kind of scary and astonishing to think about the number of disabled researchers who really truly need access to this work and can't get it.
So, I mean, we'll have some other panels on accessibility. This has been a really strong theme of the conference, but I would suggest that open access and accessibility are very, very strongly connected. Navigating one's way through an authentication mechanism is not always easy. So anyhow, I hope I've made the case that open access is making a difference to people out there in the world, real people, you and I, all over the world. So let's reclaim open access with our shared values. I think it's pretty apparent that OA STEM journal publishing has lost its way. The concentration of control, volume rather than quality, if you can't pay, you can't play, cost reduction at the expense of labor. You can see here a familiar graph probably, number of papers published by publisher between 2011 and 2021. And there you see the expansion, massive expansion of volume of papers. And you can also see with the greenish to yellow bars at the bottom, the absolute dominance of the 5 large commercial players. So let's talk about values. So the Association of University Presses articulates the core values of the association, but by extension, us as university presses in this nice diagram. And I want to talk about each one of these. Intellectual freedom. In the US, of course, we're facing an extraordinary epidemic of book banning. And there's a graph here from the American Library Association showing that in 2020, there are 223 unique titles challenged in the US. In 2023, that had grown to 4,240. So that's a huge increase. With our colleagues in the Big Ten Academic Alliance, so that's 14 university presses, we're working on a project called Big Ten Open Books, which is explicitly focused on the sorts of books that would be banned and making those open access. So we're flipping backlist books to open access. This is our first collection, the Gender and Sexuality collection, and we'll have another one following this year. Research integrity. There was an excellent article by Anthony Cond and Jane Bunker really talking about the value that we add. And I just think we're incredibly bad as university presses at telling the story of the many steps that we take to actually make sure integrity is there in our published works. So at the top, a large for-profit publisher. This is stereotyping a little bit, but this is real data. An acquisitions editor for books has a target of 55 per year. They can't spend much time on each book. There may well be just one peer review round of the proposal and some sample chapters, and then the production is all done by an outsourced vendor. Compare that to a mid-sized university press, and again, these are numbers. The target for most university press acquisitions editors in the US for monographs would be 25 a year. That's what you see in the job descriptions. Proposal and sample, peer-reviewed, maybe. The full manuscript, certainly peer-reviewed. Acquisitions editor gives detailed feedback, does some developmental work potentially. The editorial board steps in, there's debate, there's decision, there's feedback, and then the production is still coordinated in most cases, even if it's not done fully by in-house experts. The thing is that labor like this is expensive, and there's no getting away from that. This is, again, you don't need to read all of this, but this is just an editor, Leanne Fields, who retired after 49 years with the University of Michigan Press last month. And I just think it's a fascinating digital humanities project to do some text mining on a corpus and look at the acknowledgement sections of our books, and just to look to see who's acknowledged. And what's interesting there is it's not just the acquisitions editor, it's not just the acquisitions assistant, it's often the production editor, because production in university presses is a continuation of the acquisitions process. It's a really solid intervention in editorial excellence. This is not just throwing the thing over the transom to an outsourced vendor. Equity and inclusion, I mean, there are so many parts to this, but this is just a rather complex slide from my colleague Charles Allaire at Lyrasis. But the point is, UPs need to ensure that one form of exclusion is not replaced by another. We can't rely on a model of book publishing charges. We really can't. Stewardship. I mean, I think we're really doing a bad job at the moment of really getting our materials in a form that makes them flourish in an electronic environment. All our systems are still constraining us to thinking of books as print products. So we're really doing a bad job of the use of persistent identifiers. You know, some of the American university presses have only just started to learn about DOIs, and ORCIDs, RAWs, how many of you are embedding those in your workflows? How many of you are doing chapter level? Ensuring that OA books are discoverable in library systems. It's getting better. It's still not great. I'm a librarian as well as director of University of Michigan Press, and I get access to the University of Michigan Library's acquisitions system from ProQuest. I cannot find the open access editions of the books that we publish. The higher standards of accessibility, digital preservation, discoverability. Discoverability, accessibility, preservation, they're all three sides of the same not three sides of the same coin, the same dice maybe, but they are all so tightly integrated, and we need to be the excellent publishers in these three areas, and we need to track usage data more robustly. And finally, community. My colleague Amy Brand, who's the director of MIT Press, has written very interestingly from the perspective of a publisher who's also a science publisher, and she's sending a warning to us. So this quote at the bottom, of particular concern for the academic community, as subscription revenues decline in the transition to open access and some publishers prioritize other sources of revenue, is the growing ownership of data analytics, hosting, and portal services by large scholarly publishers. Even if such bundled arrangements have the near-term benefit of increasing openly licensed scholarship, they may run counter to long-term interests of the academic community by reducing competition and the diversity of service offerings. So I want to make the point that this is not about individuals, and we know many of our colleagues, dear colleagues, are working with the best will in the world for commercial entities. But there is an inexorable logic to commercial publishing that points towards scale and ownership. And I do worry a bit about the degree to which we're outsourcing the core of our mission and the core of our open access engagement to some of the world's largest commercial publishers. And that would include De Gruyter Brill, which is the world's largest humanities publisher. And I think it's very, very important to distinguish between the incredibly valuable work that our commercial partners do, but also the absolute essential reason that we have to retain our core future within the academy, within the community. It's all very well, and we all do it, we all outsource, and that is the right thing to do, but the core has to stay within the community. Because university press strength lies in bibliodiversity rather than consolidation. This is a map, again, very US-centric, but it shows North America, and it shows this tapestry of university presses, these points of light across the whole of the country. And that is our real advantage, and that is what we need to retain. Okay, so how are we going to pay for it all? I think the really important thing about thinking about payment is the fact that there are a number of different stakeholders who care about monographs. And so any approach to sustainability of open access for monographs has to spread the burden of funding across multiple stakeholders. So those who care should be asked to pay. Readers. So readers care, and in many cases, readers care enough to pay for the convenience of print. The Path to Open project from the American Council of Learned Societies and JSTOR is a project that embargoes open access for 3 years, giving a publisher the chance to actually make some money from those urgently interested readers who are willing to pay extra for a print copy. And JSTOR is handing over to many of us, you know, a whole bunch of $5,000 checks, $5,000 per book checks in the first year after the book is published without any question. And that's making a huge difference for smaller university presses, especially in terms of the advance towards open access. There are also disputed questions about how many books you publish, sell, how many print books you sell when you publish open access. We've now got a number of years of data. We believe that our print book revenue goes down about 40% when you publish open access. Not too unexpected, but I think one can play around with price points and bindings and formats and so on to make there still be a real contribution from that source. Authors and their funders. So just because you know, a BPC-centric model would be inequitable doesn't mean we shouldn't ask. We all have the habit of asking for subventions, and we don't need to stop that habit. So, you know, it's actually much more pleasurable for an institution, I think, to be able to give a subvention for an open access book than just paid charges. And we are seeing a number of institutions stepping up. One of the big problems is the way in which open access is being, for monographs, is being marginalized in funder policies. So I really draw your attention to the Palomira project, which is really trying to nudge funders across the world, especially in Europe, towards really thinking about open access thoughtfully when they thinking about open access for monographs thoughtfully. The global community of libraries. So this slide here shows a combination of the library supporters for the University of Michigan Press Fund to Mission project, MIT's Direct to Open, and the Central European and Liverpool University Press Opening the Future models. And you can see there are big gaps here in terms of countries, areas. The UK is stepping up, the US is stepping up. There are large parts of Europe that are blank, and then Australia, you know, there are a few institutions. But anyhow, there is a lot of free riding still happening, and free riding is defined as libraries that can afford to pay not paying. It's not defined as those community college libraries not paying. They're not free riders. It's the libraries who can afford to pay should be paying towards this. And I do think, however, it's very important to recognize that libraries don't have all the money, right? We have to have other support from our parent institutions. So this is about the 4 pillars, the 4 groups who benefit. And our parent institutions benefit a lot from open access. And here's a quote from my ex-boss, the provost and then dean of libraries at Michigan. $1 million a year to sustain a press may seem like a lot of money to a big research university. $1 million a year to support the publication of faculty work in the humanities is a drop in the bucket relative to the total expenditure on humanities faculty in the same university. So let's shift the way we talk about this and communicate in a way that actually makes sense to our parent institutions. And this is a little, we've just got a new Vision 2034 for University of Michigan. Democracy, civic, and global engagement. These flags are all along the roads in Ann Arbor. This is us. This is what we do. So let's tell that story. University of Michigan Press ebook collection is something I mentioned in passing. Fund to Mission is the program that we've developed to allow those 75% of frontlist books to go open. And you can find out more about it, by the way, on the squirrel cards at the back. Actually, I'm quite proud of this. It's not my original one, but it's UP, 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 and OA. Up, and away. Okay. So this is why you don't let people like me do marketing. So this is the experience we had in 2023. So this is our, we need to cover the cost of our monograph program, which is $1.6 million a year. We have these 4 pillars, and we're trying to make money out of each one. And we're not quite making it, but we're almost there. So the provost has contributed $400,000 for 3 years. We're asking her this year to turn that into a continuing line at $450,000. The global library community, and we sell our collection on a kind of subscribe to open type model, I'm looking at Richard Gallagher and being very careful, type model, very similar to MIT's direct to open. And that's raised us about $406,000 from 200 libraries, so towards 450. Funders and institutions supporting authors, that would also be philanthropy of various sorts, so we can do better there, and we have plans. We raised $217,000. And then readers of specific titles willing to pay. So these are readers who are paying for a print copy of an open access book, even when they know there is an open access book available. And we make very, very sure that Kindle, it's all open access, for example. So these are readers making a definite choice. And that is also a little bit below where we want to be. But it's within striking distance. And it's within striking distance for any university press with programs like Path to Open out there. So, up, and away. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charles. And we do now have time for some questions, if there are any questions in the room. Or if there are any questions on the app. Oh, we have a question at the back there.
Hi, Tim Colbrook from Ubiquity Press. Thank you very much for that talk. It's very interesting. Just on the point about sort of transitioning from print to digital, one, kind of like, what are the sort of main areas that you see as potential benefits of going digital, but also in particular, whether you publish books that are just full text versus books that are just, or chapter by chapter plus full text, whether you'd notice anything in particular in terms of access to those two different, whether there is anything distinguishing sort of books that are more chapter by chapter, whether that's something which a digital age has really sort of engaged with in a way that they don't necessarily engage with on the sort of full text side.
Yeah, thank you for that. Somebody mentioned yesterday the atomization of monographs being one of the issues that they're seeing, and also in the context of looking at the atomization of scholarship more broadly and how that affects monographs. I mean, definitely the case, it's absolutely the case that we get more usage when we deliver chapter by chapter. And I think that's one of the stories, that makes JSTOR so exceptional, in that JSTOR's usage is far more than all our other platforms combined. They are delivering chapter by chapter. They also have a lot of organic search. But we also see with other chapter by chapter delivery like Muse, we also see a huge bump in terms of views, not necessarily in terms of further, deeper investigations. In terms of requests, we don't see the traffic translating from investigations, but we do on chapter by chapter see more. I think what's really interesting to me is what happens when we create multimodal works, where we actually take each figure and we split that out as a separate artifact. And that's what makes Music on the Move so incredibly high in usage, because all those individual users of each section from the book are rolling up into the top usage number. And that is very interesting to us, because what we're seeing is the different components of the work being embedded in open educational resources. So we have a lot of music clips, and those are now being reused out of the context of the monograph. I think what I hear from scholars is they are very much appreciating platforms that allow the download of the full book as opposed to going chapter by chapter from a research perspective, while at the same time assigning to students the individual chapter level. And I know that there's a lot of gratitude to Muse recently for actually having added in full book download. And then the last point, and you touched on a particular interest of mine, that definitely, because we're having a nightmare creating chapter by chapter metadata, identifiers, and I talked about the systems that we're all operating with. We use title management from Firebrand. So it's a system that was designed for trade publishers publishing print. And to try and insert into that system anything below the level of the whole work is almost impossible from a metadata perspective. And we're lagging so far behind the commercial publishers now in terms of our ability to do chapter by chapter, and we're crippled by the systems we're using, taking print as a version of record. And I think we're really doing a disservice to our authors in the academic environment, because their books do not show up if published by a university press in their research information management system properly, for example. So anyhow, I'd love to talk more with you about this because I feel very passionate about it. Thank you.
We've got one at the front here first.
Hi, Charles. Ben Den, Cambridge University Press, and thanks. That was an incredibly rich presentation that you just did. There's loads of food for thought there. I wanted to ask about the. You mentioned the model with the 3-year embargo period, and to be completely open, this is a tension that we have with what we're doing as well. But one of the things that concerns me with embargo is that it's not just the people who are willing to pay that can get access to those books, it's also the people who are able to pay. And I think it feels to me, and that's true for our Flip It Open model as well, and it feels to me, this is in a way an impossible question, but there's a real tension there, and I wonder how we reconcile that tension. And I guess the other point that's sometimes brought up around this is around green archiving. I'm not a fan of green. I think either green is good enough or it isn't, and if it isn't, then it isn't. So yeah, I'm just interested in your thoughts on that question.
Yeah, so full disclosure, I was fairly involved working with John Lenihan, with John Shearer and others with the creation of the Path to Open model. The crucial thing about Path to Open is it's a path to open. So the first model there is the 3-year embargo model. That need not be the eventual, there will be other models. And I think the proliferation of different types of model is going to be very, very important. But the path can be short, the path can be longer, and there's now a governance group that will be working through those questions. The thing about the 3-year embargo is it's not suitable for everything, and it does have this compromise embedded, which is for that period, it's only going to be the libraries who have supported the model who are going to have access to the library ebook. Now, the direct-to-consumer ebook is still being sold to everybody. The print book is still being sold to everybody. And there's, of course, interlibrary loan and so on for the others. But it is absolutely disadvantaging for those 3 years certain institutions and their authors. And that is a compromise, but it feels like a reasonable one because Path to Open does seem to be meeting the needs of some scholars as well as the presses. So just as an example, so we operate this fund to mission program which covers 75% of our monographs. 25% of our monographs every year do not fit into that program. It may be because they have rights issues. It often is because it's junior scholars who are terrified of their tenure committees. And for those scholars who want to go open, the early career researchers who want to go open, they are so happy about Path to Open because they can achieve their ultimate goal of openness while still making sure they've got tenure by the time that happens. So it's really interesting. I think it just points to the fact that we have to be in this period of experimentation. And I think Path to Open is a very clever concept because of the shorter path, the longer path, and the way to sort of pivot based on how it's received. So yes, and I do agree about green. I think the point that Anthony and Jane Bunker made about just how much investment we have invested before a thing that looks like a green deposit has gone into a repository, and how little compensation we get for that investment is really important. And also the point about, if it's what version is being archived. I mean, if it's a version before the editors worked on it, like the production editor, there is a deep misunderstanding of the important role of the production editor embedded in this assumption that green is okay. Because often those are the first people thanked in the acknowledgements. It's not the acquisitions editor, it's the production editor who's been thanked. Yeah. Thank you.
We had one more at the back, and I think that will be all we have time for.
Thanks, Charles. Sorry, over here.
Sorry.
Aileen Fife, University of St Andrews. So here is the team academic, I guess. You can come and hear me later. But I was struck by the question about chapter by chapter versus full text. I mean, I, as a scholar and an author, see great use for both of those formats, and I think that they both have their uses. But it made me think the question of edited volumes and chapters in them, because here we're talking at the moment about monographs. In the UK context, the edited volume is also going to be asked to be open access by certain funders. And having just, for the purposes of this afternoon's session, had a little look at my sales figures for my last edited book from a traditional publisher, 33 copies sold. Why is this not more prominent in the open access debates? So do you have any experience from your various roles about edited books rather than monographs?
Yeah, edited volumes are so fascinating because I think so many people in this room will be familiar with that agonizing conversation with the editorial board, like, how does this fit together? The peer reviewers are like, there needs to be more connection, cross-referencing, we need to order the chapters so carefully to tell the story, the introduction needs to tie everything together. A university press edited volume is very different from a commercial edited volume in most cases, right? It is about the narrative and so on. So we get to the point of open access, we get to the point of funder mandates, ignored, completely ignored. Strip it away, this is a unit, it looks kind of like an article, it fits into our workflows, let's just pull it out of context and plop it in the repository. It's also, of course, changed our behaviors. So the idea as a university press of doing a good edited volume is being totally undermined by that kind of policy making. So we're no longer going to bother. We're not putting the references and trying to put the references at the end of the book anymore. We've not done that for a while. But now, why should we pay any attention to actually the narrative, telling the story, tying it together? Because we're not going to be rewarded for that. So I think edited volumes are a very, very interesting space. It also feels to me that we're on the edge of transformative agreements, read and publish agreements, where chapters from edited volumes are part of the agreement. So not just journal articles, but chapters. And I see Taylor and Francis pushing in this direction. That is going to be very problematic for university presses. As soon as we have transformative agreements that include chapters of books in them, and thus the whole book in a commercial publishing sense, we are going to get locked out of more and more universities. Because at University of Michigan, we're seeing this with the Wiley open access agreements, for example. Many, many, many more University of Michigan faculty are publishing with Wiley as a result of the read and publish agreement. And that is not going to be good news if books start to be included in those transformative agreements. That's not the question you asked, actually, Eileen, but it's where I went with it, so apologies. And when I made that point about Aberdeen, I looked over at you because I realized that you would completely dispel the idea that Bishop Elphinstone was the first open access publisher. Or maybe back it up. Okay.
Well, thank you, everyone. That's all we have time for now. Thanks for your questions, and thank you, Charles. The next session starts in 5 minutes, so there's either disability inclusion in the workplace in this room, or we have academic trade in the other one.